The first bullet tore past Elias Vance before he even saw the shooter. It punched into the post beside him, splintering wood into his cheek, and the street erupted into chaos. He didn't need to look to know who had fired. The Blackthorn riders had been shadowing him for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. Tonight, they'd decided to stop waiting. Elias spun toward the source, his coat snapping in the wind, eyes locking on the figures spilling out from the mouth of an alley. 6 of them, each with the same Blackthorn emblem stitched into their dust-stained vests. Their leader, Corwin Pike, was a gaunt man with eyes like cold iron and a voice that could slice through a storm. "Vance." Pike's shout carried over the wind. "You've got something that's ours." Elias didn't answer. His pulse was already hammering, his mind cutting through options like a gambler counting cards. The riders weren't here for money. They were here for the ledger in his saddlebag, the one that could burn their whole operation to the ground if the wrong lawman saw it. The wind whipped grit into his teeth. He tasted blood, though he wasn't sure if it was from the splinters or the tension coiling in his jaw. Pike stepped forward, boots crunching in the dirt. "You hand it over. Maybe you walk out of here breathing." Elias's hand hovered near his revolver. "You've mistaken me for a man who bargains." The riders moved as one, a ripple of violence ready to break. Elias didn't wait for the wave to hit. His gun cleared leather in a blur, the first shot dropping the nearest man before the others could blink. The street became a storm, gunfire cracking like lightning, boots pounding, shouts swallowed by the wind. Elias ducked behind a wagon, splinters raining down as bullets chewed through the wood. He came up firing, each shot deliberate, each movement calculated to keep him alive 1 second longer. A rider lunged at him with a knife, the blade flashing in the sunset. Elias caught the man's wrist, twisting until bone gave way, then shoved him into another attacker. The 2 went down hard, tangled in curses and dust. Pain flared in Elias's shoulder. A grazing shot, but he pushed through it, his focus narrowing to Pike. The leader was circling, waiting for an opening, his revolver steady. Elias broke the rhythm, charging straight at him, firing twice. The first shot missed. The second didn't. Pike staggered, his weapon slipping from his fingers. The wind seemed to die with him, leaving only the sound of groans and the slow settling of dust. Elias stood over him, chest heaving. "Tell the rest of your riders," he said, voice low. "The ledger stays with me." He turned away, the horizon burning gold, the night creeping in. Victory in the West was never clean, but tonight it was his. The night didn't bring peace. It brought whispers. Elias Vance sat alone in the corner booth of the rusted Spur Saloon, his back to the wall, his eyes on the door. The lamplight painted everything in shades of gold and shadow, and the air was thick with the smell of whiskey, sweat, and the faint tang of gunpowder that clung to his coat. Outside, the wind had died, but the town still felt restless, like a dog that knows the snake is still in the grass. The Blackthorn riders weren't finished. Men like Corwin Pike didn't stay down for long, and Elias knew the ledger in his saddlebag was a fuse burning toward something bigger. He poured another shot, the amber liquid catching the light. His shoulder throbbed from the grazing bullet, but he ignored it. Pain was just another voice in the room, and tonight there were too many voices already. From the far side of the saloon, a figure approached, lean, quick-moving, with eyes that darted like a hawk's. It was Mara Quinn, the only person in this town who could match Elias for stubbornness. She slid into the booth without asking, her voice low. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," she said. Elias didn't look at her. "They came looking for me. I just made sure they regretted it." Mara leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. "Pike's not the kind to lick his wounds and walk away. Word is, he's calling in the rest of the riders. That ledger you've got, it's worth killing for." Elias finally met her gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, only the sharp glint of someone who'd seen too many fights and badly. "Then I'd better make sure I'm the one still breathing when they come." She shook her head. "You can't take them all alone." The saloon door creaked open, and both of them turned. A stranger stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, with a coat that looked like it had been dragged through every storm in the territory. His eyes swept the room, landed on Elias, and stayed there. He crossed the floor slowly, each step deliberate, until he stood at the edge of the booth. "Name's Rafe Hollander," he said. "I hear you've got something that could ruin the riders." Elias studied him. "And what's it to you?" Rafe's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Let's just say I've got my own reasons for wanting Pike out of the picture. You've got the ledger. I've got the kind of trouble they can't shoot their way out of." Mara glanced between them. "This sounds like the kind of alliance that ends with one of you dead." Elias considered it. Trust was a rare currency in the West, and he'd spent most of his life broke. But the riders were coming, and the horizon was already dark with the storm they'd bring. "All right," Elias said finally. "You ride with me, you follow my lead. We don't stop until Pike's finished." Rafe nodded once. "Then we'd better move fast. Word is, they're gathering at Dry Creek Pass. If we hit them before they're ready." Elias pushed back from the table, the decision settling in his bones like iron. "Then we make sure they never get ready." They rode out before dawn, the sky still heavy with stars. The land stretched wide and empty, the kind of silence that made every hoofbeat sound like a drum. Elias felt the weight of the ledger in his saddlebag. The paper inside worth more than gold to the right hands, and worth his life to the wrong ones. By the time they reached the ridge above Dry Creek Pass, the sun was bleeding into the horizon. Below, the riders' camp sprawled across the valley, tense horses, and the glint of steel catching the morning light. Elias dismounted, crouching low. "We get in, we take Pike. We burn whatever they've got. No second chances." Rafe checked his rifle. "You take Pike. I'll keep the rest busy." The plan was simple. Simple plans had a way of surviving the first bullet. They moved like shadows down the slope, the wind carrying the smell of coffee and campfire from the riders' camp. Elias's pulse slowed, his focus narrowing to the scarred face he'd seen in the street. Pike was there, standing over a map, his voice sharp as he barked orders. Elias stepped into the open. "Pike!" The camp froze. Pike turned, surprise flashing in his eyes before it hardened into something colder. "You should have stayed gone, Vance." Elias drew his revolver. "You should have stayed down." The fight was fast, brutal, and loud enough to wake the valley. Rafe's rifle cracked from the ridge, dropping riders before they could flank. Elias moved through the chaos like a man chasing the end of a long, bitter road. When it was over, Pike lay in the dust, his breath shallow, his eyes fixed on Elias. "You think killing me ends this?" he rasped. Elias holstered his gun. "No, but it ends you." The smoke from Dry Creek Pass clung to Elias's coat long after they'd left the valley. It wasn't just the smell of burned tents and scorched supplies. It was the weight of what they'd done. The riders had been scattered, their leader cut down. But the West had a way of filling power vacuums with something worse. They rode hard through the morning, the sun climbing behind them, shadows stretching long across the prairie. Rafe kept glancing back, his jaw tight. "We didn't get them all," he said finally. Elias didn't answer. He knew it was true. The ledger in his saddlebag was still the most dangerous thing in the territory. And now every surviving rider had a reason to hunt him. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon where the wind funneled through like a whisper. Elias dismounted, scanning the ridges. "We'll rest here. Keep the horses in the shade." Rafe tied his mount, but his eyes stayed on Elias. "You've got that look," he said. "What look?" "The one that says you're about to do something reckless." Elias smirked faintly. "Reckless is the only language the riders understand." They built a small fire, the smoke curling into the canyon's pale sky. Elias pulled the ledger from his saddlebag, flipping it open. The pages were filled with names, dates, and transactions, proof of every bribe, every shipment, every killing the riders had paid for. Rafe leaned closer. "You show this to the wrong man, you'll be dead before the ink dries." "That's why I'm looking for the right one," Elias said. Before Rafe could reply, a sound cut through the canyon, the sharp crack of a rifle. The bullet slammed into the rock near Elias's head, sending shards into the fire. They dove for cover, the canyon suddenly alive with echoes. Elias spotted movement on the ridge. 3 figures, rifles flashing in the sun. Survivors from the pass. Rafe returned fire, his shots kicking up dust near the attackers. Elias sprinted to a boulder, his revolver barking twice. One of the figures dropped, the others scattering. The fight was quick, but it left the canyon heavy with silence. Elias reloaded, his hands steady despite the adrenaline. "They're tracking us," he said. Rafe nodded grimly. "And they won't stop." By nightfall, they reached the outskirts of a small town called Ashford Bend, a place Elias had avoided for years. Too many memories here, and none of them good. The streets were quiet, the lamps casting long shadows. They found the saloon, its sign creaking in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the low murmur of voices. Elias scanned the room, his eyes settling on a man at the far table, Marshal Gideon Hale. Hale was broad-shouldered, with a face carved by years of hard choices. He looked up as Elias approached, his expression unreadable. "Vance," he said slowly, "didn't think I'd see you again." Elias set the ledger on the table. "You want Pike's riders gone? This will do it." Hale's gaze flicked to the book, then back to Elias. "And what's the catch?" "No catch," Elias said. "Just make sure it's worth the blood we've already spilled." Hale studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You've just lit a fire that's going to burn half the territory." Elias glanced at Rafe. "Then we'd better be ready to ride through it." The ledger lay on Marshal Hale's desk like a loaded gun. Elias Vance stood over it, arms crossed, watching Hale's eyes move across the pages. Every name, every deal, every killing, the truth was there in black ink. And it was heavy enough to crush a man's career if he didn't handle it right. Rafe Hollander leaned against the wall, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He'd been quiet since Ashford Bend, but Elias could feel the weight of his thoughts. Hale closed the ledger slowly. "You've given me the rope to hang Pike's riders," he said. "Problem is, someone else is already pulling it." Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" Hale's gaze was steady. "Word from my deputies. The riders have a new leader. Calls himself Silas Crow, used to run with Pike. But he's meaner, smarter, and doesn't waste bullets. He's rallying the survivors, and he's got a grudge with your name on it." The name hit Elias like a cold wind. He'd crossed paths with Crow once, years ago, in a mining town that no longer existed. Crow had walked away from that meeting with a scar across his jaw and a promise to settle the score. Rafe straightened. "If Crow's in charge, we're not dealing with a gang anymore. We're dealing with a war." They left Hale's office before dawn, the streets of Ashford Bend still wrapped in shadow. Elias didn't like staying in one place too long. It made you predictable. Crow would be moving fast, and Elias intended to move faster. The prairie stretched wide and empty, the horizon painted in pale gold. Elias rode ahead, his mind turning over the possibilities. Crow wouldn't just come at him head-on. He'd cut off supplies, turn allies into enemies, and bleed him dry before the killing blow. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a narrow trail. Below, a wagon train was crawling toward the town, merchants, settlers, and a few hired guns riding alongside. Elias's eyes narrowed. "They're riding into trouble," he said. Rafe followed his gaze. "Riders," Elias nodded. "Crow's style. Hit the weak first, make the strong come to him." They descended fast, hooves kicking up dust. The wagon master, a broad man with a weathered face, looked up as Elias approached. "We're headed for Ashford Bend," he said. "Problem? Big one," Elias replied. "Crow's riders are likely waiting ahead. You need to turn back." The man shook his head. "We've got goods to deliver. Can't afford to lose the time." Elias's jaw tightened. "You'll lose more than time if you keep going." Before the man could argue, a shot rang out from the hills. The crack echoed through the trail, and the lead wagon's driver slumped forward, blood blooming across his shirt. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed, wheels rattled, and shadows moved along the ridge, silhouettes with rifles, picking their targets. Elias was already moving. He spurred his horse toward the ridge, Rafe close behind. Bullets hissed past, kicking up dirt and stone. Elias fired back, his shots deliberate, each one meant to break the attacker's rhythm. They reached the top, the wind tearing at their coats. 3 riders lay in wait, their faces hidden behind scarves. Elias didn't hesitate. He dropped the first with a clean shot, then tackled the second. The 2 of them rolling hard across the gravel. The third turned to run. But Rafe's rifle barked once, and the man crumpled. When the dust settled, the wagon train was still intact, though shaken. Elias rode back down, his eyes scanning the horizon. They were scouts, he said. Crows testing us. The wagon masters swallowed hard. Testing for what? Elias's gaze was cold. For how fast we bleed. That night, they camped in a dry gulch, the fire small and low. Elias sat apart, sharpening his knife, the steel catching the flicker of flame. Rafe joined him, dropping into the dirt with a sigh. You've got history with Crow, Rafe said. Elias didn't look up. History's just another word for unfinished business. Rafe studied him. You think you can finish it? Elias's hand stilled on the blade. I don't think. I know. Near midnight, the wind shifted, carrying a sound that made Elias's blood run cold. The distant, deliberate rhythm of hoof beats. Not fast, not urgent. Just steady. He rose, scanning the darkness. The firelight caught a figure at the edge of the gulch, tall, broad-shouldered, with a long coat that moved like shadow. Silas Crow. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching, his face half hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Then, slowly, he raised one hand and pointed at Elias, a promise. Then he turned and rode away, the sound of his horse fading into the night. Elias sat back down, the knife still in his hand. It started, he said quietly. The first sign came with the crows. They wheeled above Black Hollow in a restless spiral, their cries sharp enough to cut through the wind. Elias Vance watched them from the edge of the old mining shack, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. Rafe Hollander was inside, checking the ammunition. We've got enough for one fight, he called. Not two. Elias didn't answer. His eyes were on the ridge beyond the hollow, where the land dipped into shadow. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then he saw them. Silas Crow's riders moved in a slow, deliberate line, their horses picking their way down the slope. No rush, no wasted motion, just the steady advance of men who knew they had the numbers. Elias counted at least 20. Crow rode at the front, his long coat trailing, his face half hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Even at this distance, Elias could feel the weight of his stare. They reached the edge of the hollow and fanned out, cutting off every escape. Crow's voice carried across the distance, deep and measured. Vance, he called. You've got something that belongs to me. Elias stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. You'll have to take it. Crow's smile was slow, deliberate. That's the plan. The first shots came from the riders on the left flank, bullets sparking off the shack's walls. Elias dove for cover, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. Rafe was at the window, his rifle cracking, each shot dropping a rider before they could close in. The hollow became a storm, gunfire echoing off the rock, dust rising in choking clouds. Elias moved between cover points, his mind working faster than his trigger finger. They couldn't outlast 20 men. They had to break the siege, smoke. Elias shouted to Rafe. Rafe grabbed a small tin from his pack, striking the fuse and tossing it toward the riders. Thick, acrid smoke billowed across the hollow, swallowing the attackers in a shifting gray wall. Elias used the cover to move, sprinting to the far side of the shack. He spotted Crow through the haze, still mounted, still calm. That calm was dangerous. It meant Crow was waiting for something. Then Elias saw it, two riders circling wide, heading for the rear of the shack. If they got behind them, it was over. He broke into a run, the smoke stinging his eyes, and met them head-on. The first went down with a shot to the chest. The second swung a rifle like a club, catching Elias across the shoulder. Pain flared, but Elias drove forward, knocking the man from his horse. The fight dragged on, each minute heavier than the last. The smoke began to thin, and Crow's voice cut through again. You can't hold forever, Vance. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow, his breath ragged. I don't need forever, just long enough to make you bleed. Crow's smile didn't falter. He raised his hand, and the riders began to pull back, not in retreat, but in a slow, deliberate withdrawal. Rafe frowned. What's he doing? Elias's stomach tightened. Setting the next trap. When the hollow was quiet again, Elias stepped out into the open. The ground was littered with spent shells and the bodies of men who wouldn't ride again. But Crow was gone, and that was worse than if he'd stayed. Rafe joined him, his rifle resting against his shoulder. We won this one, he said. Elias shook his head. No, we survived it. Winning comes later. He looked toward the ridge. where the last of the riders had vanished into the horizon. Crow had tested them, measured them, and now he'd be planning the kill. Elias tightened his grip on the revolver. Next time, we take the fight to him. The land beyond Black Hollow was Crow's country. Every ridge, every dry creek bed, every wine-scoured bluff carried the weight of his presence. Elias Vance knew it the moment they crossed the old cattle trail. The silence was too deep, the air too still, like the land itself was holding its breath. Rafe Hollander rode beside him, scanning the horizon. "Feels like we're walking into a trap," he said. Elias kept his eyes forward. "We are, that's the point." They'd spent 2 days tracking Crow's riders, following the faint signs they left behind, a broken horseshoe in the dust, a campfire buried under sand, the smell of smoke carried on the wind. Each clue pulled them deeper into the Badlands, where the ground cracked under the sun and the shadows stretched long enough to hide a dozen men. By the third morning, they found what they were looking for, from the crest of a sandstone bluff. Elias spotted the camp, a cluster of tents and lindos tucked into a narrow basin. Horses tied in a rough corral, rifles glinting in the early light. At the center, a larger tent stood apart, its canvas marked with a black crow painted in broad, crude strokes. Crow's tent. Elias crouched low, studying the layout. "We go in fast, hit the center, and get out before they can close the circle," Rafe frowned. "And if they're ready for us?" Elias's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then we make them regret it." They moved at dawn, slipping down the bluff with the wind at their backs. The camp was quiet, the riders still half asleep, their guard thin. Elias and Rafe crossed the basin like shadows, their boots silent on the packed earth. The first rider to see them didn't have time to shout. Elias's revolver barked once, and the man dropped. Rafe swung his rifle toward the corral, firing twice to scatter the horses. The camp erupted in chaos. Elias pushed through the confusion, heading straight for the black marked tent. He tore the flap aside and froze. Crow wasn't inside. Instead, a young woman sat at the table, her hands bound, her eyes sharp despite the dirt on her face. "You're not one of them," she said. Elias stepped closer. "Who are you?" "Name's Lorna Pike," she said. "Corwin's sister. Crow took me when he took the riders." Outside, gunfire cracked, shouts rising. Rafe's voice cut through the noise. "Elias, we've got company." Elias's mind raced. Crow had left her here for a reason. Bait, leverage, maybe both. Taking her meant slowing them down, but leaving her meant handing Crow another weapon. He cut the ropes. "You're coming with us." They burst from the tent into the storm. Riders were closing in from every side, their faces hard, their guns steady. Elias fired twice, dropping the nearest, then shoved Lorna toward the bluff. Rafe was already moving, his rifle snapping in short bursts. "We're boxed in." Elias scanned the basin, his eyes catching a narrow gap between two boulders. There, they fought their way through, the air thick with dust and the smell of gunpowder. Bullets hissed past, ricocheting off stone. Elias kept Lorna ahead of him, his own body a shield when the shots came too close. By the time they reached the bluff, the riders were pulling back, not beaten, but satisfied. Crow had let them go. Elias knew why. This wasn't a failed ambush. It was a message. They camped that night in a dry wash, the stars sharp above them. Lorna sat by the fire, her eyes on Elias. "You think Crow will stop?" Elias shook his head. "No, he's just getting started." Rafe tossed another branch onto the fire. "Then we'd better be ready to finish it." Elias stared into the flames, the heat licking at his face. Crow had given him a choice: chase revenge into the dark, or walk away before the cost became too high. He already knew which one he'd take. The message came at dawn, nailed to the door of the rusted Spur Saloon. A single sheet of paper, the ink smeared by the night's wind, with just 3 words: Deadman's Bluff. Midnight. Elias Vance stood in the street, the paper crumpled in his fist. Rafe Hollander read it over his shoulder, his jaw tightening. "Crow's calling you out." Elias's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Then I'll answer." They spent the day in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts. Lorna Pike sat near the fire, watching Elias with a mix of curiosity and unease. "You're walking into his ground," she said finally. Elias didn't look at her. I've been walking into other men's ground my whole life. Rafe checked his rifle. Crow's not Pike. He'll have the bluff rigged, shooters in the rocks, maybe worse. Elias's voice was steady. Then we ride smart, and we ride ready. By the time the sun bled into the horizon, they were already on the trail. The land toward Deadman's Bluff was a jagged scar in the earth, sheer drops, narrow paths, and shadows deep enough to hide a dozen rifles. The wind carried the smell of sage and dust, and somewhere far below, the river whispered against the stone. They reached the bluff just before midnight. The moon hung low, painting the rocks in silver and shadow. Crow was already there, sitting his horse at the edge, his riders spread out in a loose semicircle. "Vance," Crow called, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long." Elias stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Then pull me out." Crow's smile was slow, deliberate. "I could kill you now, but I want you to see it. The moment you realize you've lost." The first shot came from the ridge. Elias dove for cover, Rafe returning fire in sharp bursts. The bluff erupted into chaos, gunfire cracking, horses screaming, dust rising in choking clouds. Elias moved low, weaving between boulders, his revolver barking in short, controlled bursts. He wasn't aiming to kill every rider, just to break their line, to get to Crow. Crow stayed mounted, his coat trailing, his revolver steady. Elias closed the distance, each step a gamble. Bullets hissed past, one grazing his arm, but he pushed through, his focus narrowing to the man in front of him. They met at the bluff's edge. Crow swung down from his horse, his boots hitting the gravel with a thud. "You should have stayed in Black Hollow," Crow said. Elias's voice was low. "You should have stayed out of my way." The fight was fast, brutal, fists, elbows, the sharp crack of bone against stone. Crow was strong, but Elias fought like a man who'd carried too many ghosts. Crow's punch caught Elias across the jaw, sending him staggering toward the edge. The drop yawned below, the river glinting far beneath. Elias steadied himself, then drove forward, slamming Crow back against the rock. His revolver was in his hand before Crow could move. "This ends now," Elias said. Crow's eyes burned with defiance. "You think killing me changes anything?" Elias's finger tightened on the trigger. "It changes you." The shot echoed off the bluff, swallowed by the night. Crow crumpled, the dust settling around him. The riders broke, scattering into the dark. Rafe joined Elias at the edge, his breath ragged. "It's done," he said. Elias holstered his gun, his eyes on the horizon. "No, it's just quieter." They turned away from the bluff, the moonlight painting their path home. The West would keep its storms, its grudges, its blood. But for tonight, Elias Vance had won. Ashford Ben's streets were too still for Elias Vance's liking. The dust from Deadman's Bluff still clung to the air, curling in lazy spirals between the buildings. As Elias guided his horse down the main road, he could feel eyes on him, some curious, some wary, and a few that carried the weight of grudges not yet spoken aloud. Rafe Hollander rode a few paces behind, his rifle resting across his saddle, scanning every shadow. Lorna Pike kept her mount steady between them, her gaze sharp, as if she expected trouble to step out from behind the next doorway. Marshal Hale was waiting at the far end of the street, his stance rigid. "Crow's gone," Hale said flatly. "But I've already heard talk. Men are meeting in back rooms, deciding who takes his place. Some of those names, you've crossed them before." Elias swung down from his horse, dust rising around his boots. "Let them talk." "Talking's easy." Hale's eyes narrowed. "They won't just talk. They'll move. And when they do, they'll come for you first." Rafe's voice was low. "Then we'd better know their names before they know ours." That night, the rusted spurs porch creaked under Elias's boots. The town was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, the kind that hides teeth. Lorna leaned against the doorframe, watching the empty street. "Feels like everyone's holding their breath," she said. Elias took a slow drink from the bottle in his hand. "Silence is just the storm's way of introducing itself." Rafe stepped out, a bundle of papers under his arm. "Hale gave me these. Ledger entries that don't match Crow's crew. Bigger network, different players." Elias flipped through the pages, each name a spark waiting for fuel. Some he recognized, old enemies, unfinished fights. Others were strangers, but the kind of strangers who wouldn't stay that way for long. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of hoof beats from somewhere beyond the ridge. Elias froze, listening. Too slow for a chase, too steady for a patrol. He set the bottle down. "We're not done here," he said quietly. Rafe's hand tightened on his rifle. "No, we're just getting started." The hoof beats began as a faint tremor in the ground, barely noticeable over the morning wind. Elias Vance was already in the street, revolver resting against his thigh. Eyes fixed on the ridge beyond Ashford Bend. The sun was just breaking over the rooftops, spilling pale gold into the dust, and every shadow seemed to stretch toward him. Rafe Hollander stepped out of the rusted spur, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon. "That's not Crow's rhythm," he said. "Too many horses. Too tight a formation." Elias didn't answer. He could feel it in his bones. Whoever was coming wasn't here to trade, and they weren't passing through. The sound grew, rolling down from the ridge like distant thunder. Then the dust appeared, a thick, rising wall that swallowed the horizon. Out of it came 20 riders, their coats marked with a crimson brand stitched into the left shoulder. They moved as one, their horses steady, their eyes fixed forward. At their head rode a woman, tall, sharp-eyed, her black scarf knotted at her throat. She sat her horse like she owned the ground beneath it. She reined in at the center of the street, her gaze locking on Elias Vance, she said, her voice carrying easily in the still air. "Name's Arden Locke. You've been making noise in my territory." Elias stepped forward, boots crunching in the dust. "Your territory?" Arden's smile was thin, deliberate. "Crow's death left a hole. I'm here to fill it. But before I do, I need to know if you're going to be a problem." The street tightened around them. Townsfolk leaned out of windows, some clutching the frames, others ducking back inside. Elias could feel Rafe shifting behind him, ready for the first twitch of trouble. "You ride into my street with 20 guns," Elias said evenly. "That's already a problem." Arden's eyes narrowed. "Then maybe we solve it now." Her hand hovered near her revolver, not quite drawing, but close enough to make the air between them hum. Then she leaned forward in the saddle. "I'm not Crow. I don't waste bullets unless I have to. But I do expect respect." Elias's voice was steady. "Respect's earned." Arden's smile returned, colder this time. "Then I'll earn it the way I know best." She turned her horse sharply, signaling her riders. They wheeled in perfect unison, the dust swallowing them as they headed back toward the ridge. Rafe stepped up beside Elias, watching the crimson-marked coats vanish into the haze. "She's testing you." Elias shook his head. "No, she's warning me." That afternoon, Elias sat in Marshal Hale's office. The ledger opened between them. Hale tapped one of the names on the page. "Arden Locke, used to run smuggling through the southern passes. She's smart, ruthless, and she's got more men than Crow ever did. If she's here, she's already got eyes in this town." Elias closed the ledger. "Then we don't wait for her to make the first move." Rafe leaned against the wall, his grin sharp. "You're thinking of taking the fight to her." Elias stood, holstering his gun. "I'm thinking of reminding her whose territory she just rode into." That night, the wind shifted, carrying faint voices from somewhere beyond the ridge, laughter, the clink of bottles, the restless shuffle of horses. Elias stood on the porch of the rusted spur, listening. Lorna Pike stepped up beside him. "You're going after her, aren't you?" Elias didn't look at her. "She came here to measure me. I'm going to make sure she doesn't like the answer." Far off in the dark, a single rider broke from the ridge and moved toward town. No dust cloud, no escort, just a lone figure, riding slow. Elias watched until the shape vanished into the shadows between buildings. Rafe's voice came from the doorway. "Scout." Elias's jaw tightened. "Messenger." He turned back toward the street, the night pressing in. Arden Locke hadn't just arrived, she'd already begun. The southern passes were a different kind of west. The air was heavier here, thick with the scent of mesquite and dust baked into the stone. The land narrowed into twisting trails between jagged cliffs, and every shadow felt like it was watching. Elias Vance knew they were riding into Arden Locke's ground, and in her ground. Every rock could hide a rifle. Rafe Hollander rode close, his rifle balanced across his saddle. "You realize she's expecting this," he said. Elias kept his eyes forward. "She's expecting me to wait." That's why we're going now. They'd left Ashford Bend before dawn, following the faint signs of Arden's riders, a broken spur in the dirt, a scrap of crimson cloth snagged on a thorn bush, hoofprints pressed deep into the dry earth. Each clue pulled them deeper into the passes, where the wind carried only silence. By midday, they reached a high ridge overlooking a basin. Below, nestled against the cliffside, was the Crimson Stronghold, a cluster of timber buildings and tents, ringed by a rough palisade. Horses milled in the corral, and armed sentries paced the perimeter. At the center stood a larger building, its walls painted with the same crimson brand stitched into Arden's riders' coats. Elias crouched low, studying the layout. We go in quiet. No gunfire unless we have to. We find her, we make her understand this isn't her territory. Rafe smirked. And if she doesn't understand? Elias's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then we make her regret it. They descended the ridge, moving along the shadowed side of the basin. The palisade loomed ahead, its timbers weathered but solid. Elias found a narrow gap where the wood had warped, just wide enough to slip through inside. The camp smelled of sweat, leather, and the faint tang of gun oil. Men moved between buildings, some carrying crates, others sharpening blades. Elias and Rafe kept to the shadows, weaving between stacks of supplies. They reached the central building and pressed against the wall. Voices drifted through the open window, Arden's voice, low and sharp, giving orders. Vance won't wait long, she was saying. When he comes, I want him boxed in. No escape. Elias glanced at Rafe, his eyes hard. She's planning for me. Rafe's grin was tight. Then let's ruin her plan. They slipped inside, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. Arden stood at a table, maps spread before her, a revolver resting near her hand. She looked up, surprise flashing in her eyes before it hardened into something colder. Vance, she said, you're faster than I thought. Elias stepped forward. And you're slower than I hoped. The tension in the room was thick. Arden's hand hovered near her revolver, but she didn't draw. You've got nerve, walking in here. But nerve doesn't keep you alive. Elias's voice was steady. Neither does hiding behind 20 guns. Her smile was thin. I don't hide. I hunt. Before Elias could reply, the door slammed open. Two of Arden's riders burst in, rifles raised. Rafe moved instantly, his rifle cracking twice, dropping them before they could fire. The room erupted into chaos, shouts outside, boots pounding, the camp coming alive. Elias grabbed Arden's revolver from the table and shoved it into his belt. You want respect, he said, earn it somewhere else. They pushed out into the sunlight, the camp closing in around them. Bullets hissed past, splintering wood. Elias and Rafe moved fast, cutting through the narrow lanes between buildings, heading for the gap in the palisade. By the time they reached the ridge, the stronghold was a storm behind them, gunfire echoing, riders shouting, Arden's voice carrying above it all. Rafe glanced back. She's not done. Elias's gaze stayed on the horizon. Neither am I. The wind in the southern passes carried more than dust that morning. It carried the sound of pursuit. Elias Vance heard it before he saw them, the faint, rhythmic thunder of hooves echoing off the canyon walls. He reined in his horse, scanning the narrow trail behind. Rafe Hollander slowed beside him, his rifle already in hand. They're coming fast, Rafe said. Elias's jaw tightened. Arden doesn't waste time. They had left the Crimson Stronghold under cover of night, slipping through the warped gap in the palisade and climbing the ridge, before the camp could fully react. But Arden Locke was too smart to let them vanish into the dark. She'd sent riders, not all 20, but enough to kill 2 men and make it look easy. The canyon ahead twisted sharply, the walls rising high and close. Elias knew it was a choke point, perfect for an ambush if they could reach it first. Push hard, he said. We make the turn before they close the gap. The horses pounded the trail, hooves striking sparks from the stone. The sound of pursuit grew louder, sharper, voices now, calling orders. The metallic clatter of rifles shifting in saddles. They reached the bend just as the first of Arden's riders came into view behind them. Elias swung down from his horse, moving to the canyon wall. We hold them here, he said. Rafe dropped to one knee, bracing his rifle. Let's make it hurt. The first wave hit fast, for riders charging into the narrow pass. their revolvers barking. Elias's shots were clean, each one echoing off the stone, dropping two before they could close the distance. Rafe's rifle cracked twice, forcing the others to wheel back. Dust swirled in the confined space, stinging eyes and throats. Elias reloaded, his hands steady despite the adrenaline. "They'll try again," he said. Rafe nodded. "And they'll bring more." The second wave came from above. 2 riders had climbed the canyon wall, firing down into the pass. Elias dove for cover, bullets sparking off the rock beside him. He returned fire, the muzzle flash lighting the dust, and one of the attackers tumbled from the ridge. Rafe shifted position, his rifle snapping toward the second. The shot was clean, and the man crumpled against the stone. For a moment, the pass was quiet, just the wind and the settling dust. Then a single rider appeared at the far end, moving slow, deliberate. Elias recognized the crimson brand on his coat, but not the face. The man stopped just out of range, his voice carrying easily. "Locke says you're not worth killing yet. She wants you alive." Elias stepped forward, his revolver low but ready. "Tell Locke she'll have to work harder than this." The rider's smile was thin. "She will." He turned his horse and vanished into the dust. Rafe exhaled, lowering his rifle. "She's playing with us." Elias holstered his gun, eyes on the empty trail. "No, she's measuring us. And next time, she'll bring enough to finish it." They mounted up, the canyon stretching ahead in long, shadowed curves. The wind carried no more hoofbeats, but Elias knew they weren't alone. Arden Locke had marked him now, and in the west, marks like that didn't fade. The southern passes gave way to the Badlands, a stretch of broken earth and jagged stone where even the wind seemed to lose its way. Elias Vance rode at a measured pace, his eyes scanning the ridges. Every shadow looked like it could hold a rifle, and every echo felt like it carried Arden Locke's name. Rafe Hollander kept close, his rifle across his lap. "If we're going to set a trap," he said, "this is the place. Narrow trails, high ground, no easy escape." Elias's gaze stayed on the horizon. "That's the point. She'll think she's cornering us. By the time she realizes it's the other way around, it'll be too late." They had spent the night studying the ledger again, marking the names tied to Arden's network. Supply runners, informants, hired guns, all threads leading back to her stronghold. Elias knew she wouldn't risk losing face by ignoring him. She'd come, and she'd bring enough firepower to make it decisive. By midday, they reached a canyon split by a dry riverbed. The walls rose steep and uneven, dotted with ledges perfect for a marksman. Elias dismounted, running his hand along the stone. "We'll hold here. Rafe, take the high side. I'll stay low and draw her in." Rafe frowned. "You're the bait." Elias's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "She wants me. Let's give her what she wants." The hours stretched long, the sun burning into the stone. Elias sat in the shade of a boulder, revolver resting loosely in his hand, listening to the canyon breathe. It started with dust, a faint haze drifting above the far ridge. Then came the sound, hoof beats, steady and deliberate, echoing down the canyon. Arden Locke rode at the front, her crimson-marked riders fanning out behind her. She spotted Elias instantly, her smile sharp. "You didn't run," she called. Elias stood, his voice carrying easily. "I wanted to see if you're as dangerous as you think you are." She signaled her riders forward. The canyon filled with the sound of hooves and the metallic click of rifles being readied. Elias stepped back, keeping them focused on him, waiting for the moment. From the ridge above, Rafe's rifle cracked, one shot, clean and loud. A rider fell, his horse bolting into the dust. Confusion rippled through the group, and Elias moved, his revolver barked twice, dropping another man before the rest could react. Rafe's second shot echoed, forcing the riders to scatter, searching for cover that wasn't there. Arden stayed mounted, her eyes locked on Elias. "You think this changes anything?" she shouted. Elias reloaded, his movements calm. "It changes you." She swung down from her horse, drawing her revolver. The canyon seemed to tighten around them, the fight narrowing to just the two of them. Bullets hissed past, ricocheting off stone. Elias moved low, closing the distance, his focus narrowing to the black scarf at her throat. The clash was fast, brutal gunfire, dust, the sharp crack of boots on stone. Elias's shot caught her revolver, sending it spinning into the dirt. She staggered back, her riders shouting, but none dared rush in. Elias stepped closer, his voice low. "You can ride out of here, Locke, or you can stay and find out how this ends." Her eyes burned with defiance, but she didn't move. The canyon held its breath. Then she turned sharply, whistling for her horse. "This isn't over," she said, mounting in one smooth motion. "Next time, Vance, I won't be playing." They rode out, the crimson coats vanishing into the dust. Rafe climbed down from the ridge, his rifle slung. "You let her go." Elias holstered his gun. "For now. She'll come back, and when she does, she won't be alone." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dust and gunpowder. Elias looked toward the horizon, already thinking about the next move. The first sign came with the smoke. Thin columns rising from the far hills, too many to be campfires, too scattered to be a single group. Elias Vance stood on the edge of Ashford Bend, watching the horizon darken. Rafe Hollander joined him, rifle slung across his back. "That's not just Locke's crew," he said. Elias's eyes narrowed. "No, she's brought friends." By midday, the rumors had reached town. Arden Locke had ridden south after the canyon fight, but she hadn't gone to lick her wounds. She'd gone to the borderlands, where the worst of the West lived, the Hollow Spurs, the Iron Veil, the Dust Wolves, 3 factions, each dangerous on their own, now riding under her crimson brand. Marshal Hale slammed his fist onto the ledger in his office. "If she's got all 3, she's got near 50 guns. You can't face that head on." Elias leaned over the desk, his voice low. "I'm not facing them head on. I'm cutting the head off the Alliance before it settles." That night, Elias and Rafe rode out, keeping to the dry creek beds and shadowed ridges. The land beyond the southern passes was wild, broken mesas, thorn-choked gullies, and stretches of open ground where a man could be seen from miles away. They moved fast, following the signs, fresh hoofprints, scraps of cloth snagged on brush. The faint smell of smoke carried on the wind. Each clue pulled them closer to the heart of the gathering storm. Near dawn, they reached a high bluff overlooking a wide basin. Below, the Outlaw Alliance had made camp, tents scattered among the rocks, horses tied in loose circles, sentries posted at every approach. Elias counted at least 40 riders, their coats a patchwork of colors and brands, but all wearing the crimson scarf of Locke's command dot at the center. Arden stood beside a fire, speaking to 3 men, each the leader of their own faction. Her voice carried in the still air, sharp and commanding. "She's binding them," Rafe murmured. Elias's jaw tightened. "Then we break the bind." They waited until the camp settled into the rhythm of morning, men eating, horses watered, guards distracted. Elias moved first, slipping down the bluff with Rafe close behind. They kept low, weaving between boulders until they were within earshot of the central fire. Arden was outlining her plan, a sweep north through Ashford Bend, cutting off supply lines, forcing the town to bend or burn. The faction leaders nodded, their faces lit by the fire's glow. Elias stepped into the open. "You'll have to burn me first." The camp froze. Arden's eyes widened for a heartbeat, then narrowed. "You've got nerve, Vance." Elias's revolver was already in his hand. "And you've got too many friends." The first shot cracked from Rafe's rifle, dropping one of the faction leaders before he could draw. Chaos erupted, shouts, gunfire, horses screaming. Elias moved through the storm, each shot deliberate, each step aimed at breaking the Alliance before it could solidify. Arden fought back, her revolver barking, but the camp was unraveling. The Hollow Spurs scattered first, their leader gone. The Dust Wolves pulled back next, unwilling to die for a cause they didn't own. When the dust settled, only Arden and a handful of her riders remained. She stood across the fire from Elias, her face hard. "You think this ends me?" Elias holstered his gun. "No, but it ends this." She mounted her horse, the crimson scarf snapping in the wind. "Then I'll start something else." Rafe joined Elias at the fire, his breath ragged. "We broke them." Elias looked toward the horizon, where the smoke was already thinning. "For now. But storms don't die in the west, they just change direction." The wind over Hollow Mesa carried the smell of rain and gunpowder. Elias Vance stood at the edge of the plateau, the land falling away into a maze of canyons below. Behind him, Ashford Ben's defenders, a mix of townsfolk, ranch hands, and a few hard-eyed drifters, checked their weapons in silence. Rafe Hollander stepped up beside him, scanning the horizon. "She's coming," he said. Elias didn't need to look. He could feel it, the low tremor in the ground, the rhythm of hooves rolling closer. Arden Locke had rebuilt faster than anyone thought possible, and now she was bringing everything she had to finish what she'd started. The first crimson-marked riders appeared on the far ridge, their silhouettes sharp against the storm-dark sky. Then came more, dozens, fanning out, their coats snapping in the wind. At the center rode Arden, her black scarf trailing, her eyes locked on Elias. She reined in, her voice carrying across the mesa. "This is where it ends, Vance." Elias stepped forward, his revolver loose in his hand. "For one of us." The storm broke as they clashed. Gunfire cracked like lightning, the air thick with dust and rain. Elias moved through the chaos with grim precision, each shot deliberate, each step calculated to hold the line. Rafe's rifle barked from the high ground, dropping riders before they could flank. Arden fought like a force of nature, her revolver flashing, her horse cutting through the defenders. Twice she came within striking distance of Elias, and twice he turned her back with steel and fire. The fight dragged into the heart of the storm. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the mesa became a blur of mud, blood, and grit. Elias felt the weight of every decision pressing against him, every life saved, every one lost. Then, in the driving rain, he saw her. Arden was pushing through the last of the defenders, her revolver raised. Elias stepped into her path, their eyes locking in the half-light. "This is your last chance," he said. Her smile was cold. "I don't take chances. I make them." The final exchange was fast, brutal. Elias's shot struck true, the sound swallowed by the storm. Arden staggered, her revolver slipping from her hand, and the crimson riders broke, scattering into the rain, vanishing into the canyons. Silence fell over Hollow Mesa, broken only by the wind. Rafe joined Elias, his breath ragged. "It's done." Elias holstered his gun, his gaze on the horizon. For now, the storm began to clear, the clouds pulling back to reveal a strip of pale dawn. Elias turned away from the mesa's edge, the weight of the fight settling into his bones. In the west, victories were never permanent. Only the will to face the next storm mattered. In a land where the wind never rests, neither can the man who rides against it.